Welcome to Leadership Explored, the podcast where we dive into what it really means to lead in today's world. I'm Ed Schaefer, joined as always by my co-host Andy Siegmund. In the corporate world, we absolutely love the idea of mental toughness. We praise the leaders who can grind through 80-hour weeks, absorb endless stress, and just keep pushing. We treat the human brain like an engine that just needs to run hotter and harder. But here is the problem. Toughness is rigid. A glass vase is tough, but if you push it off a table, it shatters. A tennis ball is soft, but if you drop it, it bounces back. Mental toughness is just the ability to endure suffering, but mental fitness is your elasticity. It's your capacity to process a disruption and recover your equilibrium. It's a biological, trainable skill, not just a personality trait. So today, we are unpacking the actual architecture of mental fitness. We'll talk about how different psychological frameworks actually say the same thing, how to measure your own recovery speed, and why going to war with your own brain is a losing strategy. So Andy, when we look at the leaders around the world today or that you work with today, do you think organizations actually understand how and work toward building mentally fit teams, or are they still just demanding mental toughness and wondering why everyone's burning out?
Ed, that might be the most loaded question you've asked me in all of these conversations that we've recorded. Um, you know, I think it really depends. I think some organizations are trying in various ways to focus on this, right? Things like Wellbeing Wednesday and things of that nature. But I think overarching, like, especially in the technology space, especially in white collar work, right? There's kind of this vibe or expectation that, like, this is the job, go do the job, end of conversation. Right, which is basically like, yeah, suck it up and grind it out and figure it out. And if you can't do it, we'll find someone who can. And some of that, is just like the blunt realities of, like, these are high paying jobs. The expectations are high. The cost to replace, relatively speaking, is low because they're high paying jobs, right? You see this with a lot of organizations that might have, for example, like unregretted attrition quotas, right? The reason that they have that is that that's a management tool that they have to keep the bar at a certain level. And the only reason that they can do that is because there are enough people knocking at the door who want that job, right? So, Ed, if you don't want this job, I've got 5 people, out my door who want this job. So I'll find someone who can do it. I think the other part too is, like, where I've seen organizations employ programs for, well-being or mental fitness, right, to work against burnout. Either they're woefully underfunded. You've got, like, one person who puts these programs together for, an organization of 5,000 or something like that. Or if it is funded, as soon as budgets get constrained, it goes from a need to have to a nice to have. And when budgets are constrained, all the nice to haves are cut, right? If you think about, your household, you're yeah, when you're doing well, you're eating sushi, and when you're not doing well, you're eating beans and rice, right? That's just kind of the way it is. So, yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I did.
No, I think we got your thoughts there. And I mean, I think I fundamentally agree with you. I don't think most organizations actually understand how to build mentally fit teams. And I don't think most organizations are working towards building mentally fit teams. I think a lot of times it is mental toughness that they're looking for. And behind it, they may say that they want uh, like what the fundamentals of what would make up mental fitness, but I don't think they support it in any meaningful way. And a lot of the programs that I've seen, if they're even invested in, it might be like a, Headspace or Calm subscription for some meditation, and maybe like limited access to a therapist or something through an employee
Yeah, you get six
assistance
free
program.
sessions a year, or yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Instead of what I would potentially think would be more valuable would be programs that are intended to help develop mental fitness and help people become more mentally fit, and making time and space and encouraging people to go through those programs instead of it being, even if there was a program that would take you through it that they offered, they probably wouldn't say, and 1 hour a week, make sure you come to this session, this live session with your coach or whatever to help you work through it. And I do think there's just big problem of burnout throughout the industry, and not
Mhm.
just our industry, a lot of associated industries. I know healthcare burnout is extremely high. Um, and I don't think that companies are doing enough to help manage that or help both help reduce the effects of burnout, but also to help strengthen their teams and the individuals who work for them to make sure that they can respond to challenges in an effective way, and also giving them space to recover when they need it. But I guess let's set this up a little bit more. This idea of toughness versus fitness and recovery
Mhm.
velocity. So the our listeners can't see this visual that I have that I shared in our run of show notes here, but there's this concept of the stress curve. And so imagine in your mind it looks like a standard normal distribution type curve, and the way that it's divided up is on the left side. On that vertical axis we have performance, and on the horizontal axis we have stress level. And so if you think of a normal distribution curve, and this is kind of similar to the adoption curve or like the early adopters curve, things like that. It's kind of a similar visual. If you've seen those, you could probably picture it. So on the far left, at the very beginning of the curve, we have too little stress. And this means that you're underloaded. And when you have too little stress and you're underloaded, we tend to be inactive, is the language they use for the stress curve. And then there's, as we move up the curve, the second and this is broken into four. So the second one is optimum stress. And when we cross from the underload to optimum stress, it's kind of laid back in that sort of zone. But as we move up the curve and we get closer to the peak of it, we get closer and closer to approaching fatigue, because we can't, we, optimum stress, we kind of move up, but then at a certain point we hit the peak where it's no longer optimum. We're getting overly stressed. And that moves us into the third quadrant, which is too much stress, which is overload. And that's where the curve starts to come back down again. And when you are starting to come down the curve, so your performance is dropping and your stress level is continuing to rise. And this is where exhaustion sets in. And then the fourth quadrant is called burnout. And when we're starting to transition from the overload or too much overstress into burnout, we hit a point where there's anxiety, panic, and or anger. It could be all three of those or some combination. And then as we get towards the very end of the curve, where our performance is dropping back down to zero and our stress level is at infinity, based on the way this is drawn, we break down. Um, and so this is a well-known understanding of stress. And I think the fundamental problem with not exploring mental fitness, thinking about mental toughness, is there's this trap, and mental toughness relies on suppression. We need to ignore distress to maintain performance, right? We ignore the fact that we're overly stressed, and we try to keep our performance as high as possible. We just stay tough, and the idea would be we're like stretching this curve out and having our optimum stress. We're trying to make our optimum stress last longer and not start to slide back down the curve. Um, but really, toughness should only be an emergency shield. We should only need to use it in rare occurrences when we need to extend our mental ability for a longer period of time when something's happening. It's like the difference. I know you run a lot. I used to run, and hopefully will, and
Mhm.
again more in the future. But it'd be the difference between like a 5K. You might be able to just breeze through a 5K no problem, or like maybe if you're not so fit, it might be a little bit tiring, but it's not so big of a deal. But if you go to a marathon, or even longer, to like an ultra marathon to 100 miles, there's a certain point where like your body's breaking down, that you're struggling through it, but this is a one-time thing. It's this race, so I'm going to tough through it, and I'm just going to push and carry forward. And that's what mental toughness is really for. It's for situations like that that are not standard, not normal, but come up once in a while. And it so it's something that we can use, but it's not the same as being mentally fit, because when we're mentally fit, we have neuroplasticity and we can use cognitive reframing. We're not just toughing through something; we're actually evaluating the situation and trying to change both our viewpoint on it, but also how it's affecting us and how we approach it.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth talking about too with this ad, much like the running analogy, is like there's an immense amount of plasticity in your ability to grow capacity for these things, right? So you talked about like running a 5K versus 5 miles or 10 miles, right? Or a marathon or whatever. And like in running training, right, you'll run a lot of miles at a sub maximal pace so that you can run a few miles sometimes at a maximal pace, right? So like if you're a well trained runner, even if you're a 5K specialist, right? Training for the 5K, you'll have days that are easy, you'll have days that are super hard. When you actually go and race it all out, that is an extremely stressful endeavor and usually requires a couple of days of recovery. And with work and mental things, it's the same thing, right? If you spend a fair amount of time at sub maximal stress, like kind of in that second quadrant where there's enough stress that you're activated and that you're working on things, you can grow your mental fitness, you can grow your capacity to manage in the crisis, you can grow your toughness, if you will. But that toughness when deployed is like it's super finite. Like you can do it for a concrete amount of time, you can increase the amount of time that you can deploy it, but like at a certain point that runs out, right? So the fitness, it becomes a recoverability thing and a capacity growth. And if you think about this too, like if you think back across your career, the stuff that stressed you out 10 years ago is probably like water off your back nowadays, right? Because one, you've been there before, so you've got data, you've got proof that you can do this, right? There's not that uncertainty aspect. And two, just broadly from being in the industry, from doing the things that you've done, you've increased your capacity to handle these things, right? So like what was a 5 alarm fire 10 years ago barely registers, and what's a 5 alarm fire to you today might have killed you 10 years ago, right? To be super hyperbolic about it. But I think it's really important to make sure that folks understand that like this is a skill set that you can grow, that you can deploy. You're not set with like a finite amount of like, this is the amount of stress that I can handle. Like you can increase that capacity over time. If you want to grow your career, you're probably going to have to. You're probably going to have to figure out a way to like, be pretty zen while the house is on fire, because that's what a lot of these larger roles entail. But the expectation is that you don't learn to do that overnight, right? You learn to do that through thousands and thousands of reps at lower output.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one more analogy for any of our listeners who aren't runners or haven't had a history of that, or don't want to relate to that, or don't relate to that at all. The Another way to think about it would be, I was thinking about sleep, right? Like
Mm.
every once in a while in your life, you might need to pull an all-nighter. Maybe it was because you were writing a paper, or there's a big project with a deadline, or something happens unexpected, or you have to stay up all night for a flight or something, right? But
Or a
I
concert and lots of fun.
yeah, yeah, but I don't want to stay up all night every night, right? And I probably can't. And if I try to, I'm going to start wearing myself down and burning myself out to where even during a normal day, after a normal night's sleep, I'm going to feel pretty tired still. And if I have really good sleep hygiene and sleep habits, and I take care of my health, and I generally have things pretty well managed, then those occasional times when I do need to pull the all nighter, I'm much better able and equipped to handle it. And maybe if I know I have to pull an all-nighter coming up, maybe I get a few nights of longer sleep. I lay down earlier and sleep in a little bit later and try to build up a little bit of a bank to help with that all-nighter. But even if I stayed in bed every day for 10 weeks, there's no way that I could pull an all-nighter for 5 days in a row, right? Your body just can't support it and won't allow it. And so I think that's a really good analogy for this too, right? We might be able to do some things to extend how long we can pull the all-nighter before we're completely trashed and burned out, but we are still going to break down and burn out if we try to extend it for too long. And if we do nothing, if we have horrible sleep hygiene and every night I go to bed at a different time and I only get 3 hours of sleep, when I do need to pull that all-nighter, it's going to be a lot more difficult because I don't have the reserves and the capability to do it. Um, so yeah, now that we've kind of explained some of that, and I hope everybody understands that difference between toughness and how fitness is more holistic, and we'll talk about that some more as we go. But I want to talk about the anatomy of disruption. So when a crisis hits, it's not about if you fall, because a lot of times that's out of your control and you may
Mhm.
fall anyway, but it's about how you fall. So the three kind of pieces to this, one would be tolerance. How much friction can you take before you crack? And then fortitude is how deep into the emotional hole do you fall when you crack? And then resilience is how fast you climb back out of the hole and get to baseline, right? So going back to the fitness example, well, how long can you run before you break down and your legs don't work and you just can't run any further? And that's something that you could keep training and eventually build your tolerance for that to be longer and longer. And then the fortitude piece would be, well, let's say that you do run that big race and you go all out and you push yourself as hard as you can. How long does it take you to recover from that hard push? If you're in really great shape, you might run a really hard race and maybe it's only a day or 2 or 3 days before you're ready to go. Where somebody who hasn't been training or like, oh, I'm going to just go run a marathon. I've never run a day in my life before. They might come out of the marathon and it might take a week or 2 weeks before their legs feel
You,
normal, and they
you
might,
might be Barney Stinson on the subway and your legs stop working.
yeah, and you might never want to run again, right? If that were to
Yeah.
happen. And then the resilience piece would be how fast do you climb back out and get back to baseline and be ready to go. So all three of those things, they apply to any disruption that we have in our everyday life, any stressors, something just doesn't go your way or something unexpected happens. And so, I guess the irony about burnout is that you can possess highly effective mental fitness skills. Like you could have positive thinking or talk about resilience, things like that, but you could still be completely exhausted and wiped out. Just because you're fit doesn't mean you have infinite energy. It just means that when you're mentally fit, you know how to recover, and you're able to not fall as far and recover a little bit faster when you take those hits. So, I know a few years ago I took you through a mental fitness program. It was the positive
Mhm.
intelligence program a few years ago, and I guess I'm curious, like, how did that feel for you? Was that something that you thought was interesting? Did it give you different insights into this kind of idea of mental fitness versus toughness?
Yeah, and I thought it was useful, and it also coincided with the time of my life when I was, spending a fair amount of time reading about stoicism, right? Which a lot of that is, separating what you can control and what you cannot control, and focusing on what you can, and letting what you can't be what will. As well as working with a cognitive behavioral therapist. If anyone has seen Shrinking, they do a pretty good explanation and example of, what CBT is. But basically, CBT has that similar breakdown of like, there's the things that are happening, and then there are your reactions to it, right? Or your thoughts about the things that are happening. And if you have negative thoughts, right, what you're doing is, it's kind of that the idea of the two arrows, right? If you've heard that this parable, yeah, if you get shot with an arrow, um, you know, what hurts more, like getting hit with it or thinking you're getting hit with it, right? And if you when you're thinking about it, you're essentially getting yourself shot twice, right? And a lot of like the CBT constructs are trying to figure out, like, are you thinking about this clearly, are you thinking about this with some variation of distortion, right? So they provide you with all sorts of tools as far as like separating what is objectively true versus what are your thoughts about this, and are your thoughts harming you or making things worse. And I think a lot of the PQ program was within that same vein. So like for me, it was really helpful because it was like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about all these things like generally in the same context. And that was super valuable, right? To be able to kind of differentiate between like what's happening versus what am I interpreting that's happening, right? So like one of the great like Stoic lines is that he who is offended is complicit in the offense. So like you cannot offend me, I have to let you offend me, right? Right, because it's how I think about the thing that offends me. Um, Yeah, so I found a lot of that really, really useful. I did like the idea of like the PQ reps, which is just functionally a centering exercise, like a grounding exercise. And I think that that's all just like really useful for resetting your expectations and resetting where you are and not letting your proverbial monkey mind run havoc without like being reined in and bringing yourself back to what's actually going on in a given setup.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you being a guinea pig for me as we were going through that, and I thought there was a lot of good about that, and something I wanted to, kind of call out and acknowledge about that program is even though I was I'd gone through it myself, and then I was going through the coaching part of it, and then I was coaching you and some other folks, going through the program. What's funny is even with all of that, I eventually got burnt out because they were making a bunch of changes to the program itself, and I had done all this preparation and trying to understand it and prepared materials and things. And as they were changing the program, it kind of the stress of needing to adapt and make those changes started to burn me out. So even
Mm,
tools that are designed to help us can become a drain sometimes if we don't manage our capacity, or in that case I think I overinvested in the original version of the program, and probably could have done a little bit less so that I was more flexible and more prepared as they were making changes. So, with that in mind, we often have moments in our life where our tolerance breaks and we snap. When you look at your own career, Andy, do you think your focus has been on trying to never snap or on trying to recover faster when you do?
I think early in my career it was trying not to snap, and I think like some of this also comes with like the trajectory of how you build a career, right? So early in your career, I think for most folks, it is advantageous to move through jobs relatively quickly, right? That's how you make more money, right? If you try to get promoted, if you can't get promoted internally, try to see if you can get promoted externally. Um, and that can cause a lot of frustration as you're trying to kind of work through things and close through the ranks or move through the ranks, especially if you're ambitious. And especially, in the context of like most corporate environments where you have to do the job before they will give you the job, right? And oftentimes you have to do the job for quite a while before they will give you the job. But I think early in my career, I can think of quite a few different inflection points where I was like, had a strong case of the efforts, and it was like very hard to kind of get over that, the like I want to rage quit today, or like I'm going to go rage apply for new jobs, or what have you. As I've gotten, and like that led to leaving a few roles. Fortunately a lot of it worked out in my favor, in hindsight. But um I think early on, right, it was a lot of like focusing on, not snapping. And as I've gotten further in my career, I think the focus has changed. I think it's the realization that like 3 to 5 times a year, I'm probably gonna want to rage quit my job, and that's normal, and that's like kind of unavoidable. And oftentimes, it's like when maybe you snap at your spouse or your dog or whatever, like it's not about the thing, it's about everything that's surrounding the thing, right? It's the sum of its parts. And realizing that like it's a we're talking about a moment in time, and that moment in time is passing and it's recoverable. And oftentimes like the thing that you're upset about, or that you're stressed out about, or whatever it is, offended by, um, is it is and should be a learning opportunity, right? And being able to reframe it in that context is really, really valuable. And I for those listening, I will qualify that like not all learning opportunities are equal. Some learning opportunities are I've learned that I don't like sticking my hand on a hot stove, right? That is still a learning opportunity. I've learned that this is not the role for me is a learning opportunity, but more often than not, there's something really interesting or really engaging in anything you might get asked to do. Just your ability to receive it in a given moment might not always be at its best. And I think the more that you can recover from that and like learn to take feedback, learn to roll with the punches, learn like, hey, like every part of me right now feels like it's on fire because of this situation that's going on. But like there's eventually this situation will not be going on. And it's like usually way shorter than you think. Like if you're really stressed out about something, usually that's your own brain making you stressed out about it, or the outcome is not as bad as you think it's going to be. Oftentimes like that anxiety is coming from like a lack of action, and if you just kind of buckle down and do the darn thing, you'll notice a lot of those negative things will kind of, you know, float away. So it's a
Yeah.
long way to partially answer your question.
No, I mean,
That's
I
gonna be my move today, Ed, is I'm just gonna partially I'm gonna answer your question partially and also answer the question I wanted you to ask.
sure.
Um,
Well, I mean, this can be a difficult topic. It does require some sense of self-awareness and reflection, and willing to explore some things that might be uncomfortable, or
mhm,
that you maybe don't like to expose to yourself or to other people. I think
mhm,
that's a lot of the work behind this. Um, as you were talking about, I was thinking, I would say, I don't think my focus has been on trying to never snap, but I do think my focus maybe has been on um, trying to be like the reeds, or like there I have this tree in my
the
front yard.
bamboo.
Yeah, like the wind comes, and like I mean, bamboo is a little bit stiffer than maybe the example I was thinking in my head, but like the wind comes, and with reeds it can blow the reeds over. They can basically touch the ground, right? But then as soon as
Mhm,
the wind stops, they might stand right back up, or as soon as they get a little
yeah,
bit of water or whatever, they come back up. They move with the wind, and they don't typically like get knocked over and break, right?
yeah.
And I think that's something that I have been developing over my career and over my lifetime. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, if I expect bad things to happen and I worry about them, as opposed to, well, bad things are going to happen, so I just need to be prepared to respond to them as best as I can. And accepting some of the things that are outside of your control, thinking of like locus control. What can I control?
Mhm,
What can I influence? And what is outside of my control or influence? Doing my best to accept those things. But then there are times that I would say, I guess, I snap, and it's similar to what you're describing, maybe a few times a year, ready to rage quit, or look for another job, or maybe I should go become a baker or something. I don't know. And I think that is a sign, right? And some people wait. They try to tough it out and use their mental toughness to
mhm,
delay that as much as possible. And then when it hits, it really breaks them down. And now it feels like I absolutely have to look for another job or whatever. And it's not a signal, it's too late, right? They're already into
mhm,
this has happened. Like the smoke detector is going off, but the fire is also raging and the house is burning down, and we can't really stop it. Where if you feel like you're getting to that point and you're able to observe it early, sometimes you still will snap, but maybe you are able to minimize how big the break is or how bad it is. Maybe by being prepared, like recognizing that is happening or coming, maybe that helps you recover from it faster. Or maybe like knowing that those things do happen sometimes, and having a toolkit ready to go, of the things that help you. And maybe that's taking time off, maybe that's doing some other activities, whatever, can help you recover a lot faster. So I would say, it's probably not healthy to try to never snap and prevent the snapping, because sometimes it's just going to happen and be out of your control. But I do think that learning to play in the wind a little bit more, and let it knock you
mhm,
down without breaking you and bouncing back up, is that recovery. But then also, when you do have the break, knowing how to recover and recover faster, setting yourself up, I think, is really a powerful set of tools. But I guess we should get into what's going on behind this, or why is this
Mm,
happening for a lot of folks? And I think the main thing we need to do is talk about the internal dialogue that a lot of people experience. So the question I think would be, how do we catch our emotions without fighting ourselves? And Andy, when we did that coaching program, you mentioned this already, the PQ reps. So we practiced doing those reps to stop negative spirals. And for the folks in the audience, a PQ rep in their context would be, it's usually one of our senses, so something you can feel, see, touch, maybe taste, maybe hear, and you just focus intently on it for a brief amount of time. So my favorite
mhm,
one is rubbing the tips of your fingers together with such an amount of force that you can actually feel the fingertip ridges on both fingers. And there's also, you could feel yourself sitting in the chair, hear the sounds around you. There's quite a few more, and these aren't exclusive to PQ. You know, he kind of co-opted it a little bit from some other research. Um,
and
uh,
a lot of these practices have been, available or utilized by, various modalities, whether it be like, yeah, tai chi or meditation or, what have you, for literally thousands of years. They're grounding exercises for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of something I wanted to bring up as for this conversation is sometimes people will ask, and some people have asked me like, "Oh, what do you think is the best? What's the best way to meditate, or what's the best way to grow your mental fitness, or the best this or the best that?" I've had there's been arguments sometimes, I guess I would call them, where somebody says, "Well, I don't like this one because of this language that they use, and I like this one." And I think underlying it, a lot of these concepts are similar. They are grounded in the same origin, and they affect the same parts of ourselves. And so I think being open minded and recognizing that you could practice, you know, just using meditation as the example, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of different types and formats of meditation. No one of those is better than the other. Some might resonate better with you than they do with me, or some might resonate with you in a particular moment or for a particular circumstance, or give you benefits that other ones don't quite give you. And so I think mixing and matching and keeping an open mind is a really valuable thing for this. Um, but anyway, so we what I was saying was we did those reps to help stop negative spirals. When you first started trying to catch your own thoughts, and I know it may have been prior to that program with what you were discussing, but did it feel weird to pause and observe yourself instead of just reacting, or how did that feel different for you?
Yeah, and it's not natural, right? Especially in in the thick of it. And even now, I've been practicing some of these things for a while. Like it's almost always a retrospective thing. And when I say retrospective, like sometimes it's like right after a call, sometimes it's a couple of days later. Like the tail on the the catching it can, for me at least, can be like pretty long, where it's like, oh yeah, like I was super anxious about this thing, and that was entirely like my own saboteur. And sometimes I have to let the dust settle before I can go look at it. You know, and I do have various practices that I'll try to do broadly to recover a little bit within it. Like I've joked for a while that like the reason that I refuse to live without a dog, like I need to have a dog, is because the dog forces me to take walks during the day, and I cannot force myself to take walks during the day. But having a dog means like, oh yeah, I should probably like go walk her around the block. And that forces me to just like get out of my home office, go, touch grass, if you will, and just kind of be out in the world. And that will, it won't take you from a 9 to a 2, but it will take you from a 9 to a 7 more times than not.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. And something as you were describing that, I think to put it into like DevOps terminology or domain language that we might use for our type of work is, I think the thing we're trying to do really is shift catching those thoughts and feelings and emotions, like recognizing them and observing them and shifting them left, right? Because
Mhm.
like anger is one that a lot of people can kind of understand easier than maybe some of the other emotions for this. So if if something is about to happen, where if I'm able to observe my feelings and emotions and recognize I'm starting to get angry, or I might get angry when this thing happens, that would be the best time for me to catch myself and kind of like, oh, why am I, be curious, ask questions, like explore that feeling and emotion so that it doesn't take off, right? And
Mhm.
that would be the best. That'd be the furthest left. Maybe the next best would be you start to get angry, but as you're getting angry, I'm getting angry at Andy. Oh, wait a sec. I just noticed I'm angry. And you kind of pull yourself back and catch yourself. And, if we're where most people are, we're all the way right. Right. Maybe you never even think about the fact that you got angry and what was behind it and why that all occurred. Or maybe you get angry
Just
and
pure id.
yeah, pure id. Or maybe you get angry and a week later, you're like, man, why was I so angry about that? That doesn't really seem like it mattered that much. Right. And uh, those at those points, it's basically too late. Like the anger has consumed you. It took over. It clouded your judgment and maybe your decision making and maybe your discretion. It could have had negative impacts. It could have caused relationship problems. Who knows what? And so if we can
Mhm.
shift that further and further left to the point where you feel the emotion starting to rise in you and you're able to catch it at that point and go like, well, what's going on that I'm feeling angry right now? Like maybe you're just hungry. Maybe it's a sign that something is not going your way the way you expected and you need to change expectations. Or I mean, it could be a million things, but it gives you an opportunity to do something about it instead of letting it kind of well up and take over and completely subsume everything that you can see and hear and think and feel, which I think gives you a lot more control and it gives you more options ultimately.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about in this section, and one of them you kind of already brought up. You mentioned that in positive intelligence, they would call when you get um, like one example might be hyper vigilant. If you start moving into hyper vigilant, they call it a saboteur.
Mhm.
But different frameworks really use different words. So PQ calls them saboteurs. Internal family systems, which is a type of therapy with the idea being that there are parts in of yourself, and different parts have
Mhm.
different kind of responsibilities, but they also have different feelings and emotions towards things. And sometimes those parts can, like maybe they're supposed to have supposed to is in quotes here, but supposed to have the responsibility of like helping you be creative. But because of something that happened in your childhood or whatever, it took on the responsibility of trying to protect you. And
Mhm.
anyway, so they IFS calls them protectors, but ultimately these things are the same thing, right? They're survival mechanisms that are ultimately over functioning. It's almost like
Yeah,
the an
and
auto,
CBT calls them cognitive distortions.
yeah, it's kind of like an autoimmune disease where your body is attacking healthy tissue. So in this case, our brain's protector is going haywire and it's attacking your peace of mind. It's making you stress out or get angry or, worry about something or whatever the case might be. And you can't defeat that, right? There's no, like, it's a part of you and there's nothing wrong with the parts of you that are doing that because it's just trying to protect you and keep you safe. So you can't beat it. The best thing you can do is kind of manage it. And even then, managing it sounds like you need to control it or keep it under wraps. And it's really more about seeing it and observing it and reflecting on it and being able to have awareness of it. And like I was saying, the
And
earlier, the better.
yeah, and determine whether or not it's providing you with something helpful or something harmful. Is it disrupting your peace based on like actual concrete data and like this is a threat that you should indeed be worried about, or is this your body hearing a ruffle in the bushes and thinking lion when it's actually bunny? I think it's probably worthwhile to walk through like a very kind of common like pattern of thought in the workspace that this would be encompassed by. So I know I've expressed this to you. I know I've had a lot of friends have like this same pattern that I'll like super reduce for the sake of this conversation. But like your boss gives you criticism about a thing that you've done, and your brain if you're more anxious or more defensive broadly, your brain goes, my boss doesn't like me, I'm going to get fired. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. I need to find a new job and quit before they can fire me. logically, right, that does like the pattern kind of makes sense. But more likely than not, your boss is trying to have a coaching conversation with you, or redirect something that's not super meaningful or is not indicative of your holistic performance, but you have immediately escalated to that I didn't get an A on this test, so I'm going to get fired, right? And it's like this happens to folks all the time. Again, this is a super, super simple reduction, but those are the sorts of things where you need to kind of think in it of like, wait a second, okay, this is feedback. Is this like, yes, I should act on this feedback, but is this truly critical, like career threatening feedback? Or is this is this a redirect of something that I'm doing? Is this a way to make something I'm doing better or faster or more time effective, or what have you? But I think it's very easy to, pull out our jump to conclusions, Matt, and go all the way down the wrong road.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this connects to the next thing I wanted to bring up, which is this idea of emotional granularity. Um, Most people can't describe their emotions. And I'm not saying I'm an expert at it. I'm not always able to recognize my emotion or use the right words for it or anything like that. But it's a lot harder to recover quickly if you just say I'm stressed when really there's other emotions or feelings behind it. So when you reduce your emotion or feeling to one of the big three or big four or whatever, right? Like, oh, I'm either angry, I'm happy, or I'm sad. That's not really enough granularity to know what's going on, right? So in the example that you just gave with the boss, they come to you and they give you that feedback, and you just go, "Well, I'm afraid," or "I'm stressed," and it's like, "Well, why? What do you mean? What? Why are you afraid? Or what is the stress? What's behind it?" And maybe it's really like, maybe you worked really hard on the thing that you got negative feedback about, so maybe you feel embarrassed or ashamed. Maybe you're frustrated because you thought that like maybe based on previous feedback you thought that you were doing the right thing, and now you're hearing something different. Maybe you're relieved because you were doing something blind and you weren't really sure if you were doing the right thing or not, and now you've got some direction and guidance that you can feel, you can know better and feel better that you're making the right decisions, right? And if we just tried to boil that down to happy, angry, sad, afraid, you really can't understand what's going on behind it. And when you can't understand it, then you can't really do anything about it. So if you can distinguish between feeling disappointed, overwhelmed, or unsupported, by having those high resolution labels, it can physically shift your brain out of panic mode. And instead of saying like, "I'm stressed," you might say like, "I'm feeling stressed right now." Because those feelings and emotions, as soon as you say I'm this thing, and I know we learned this with PQ with the saboteurs, right? You don't say I am hypervigilant. You say I have a hypervigilant, or I have hypervigilance, or there's a part of me that is hypervigilant. And
Or I am experiencing.
yeah, I'm experiencing hypervigilance. So you're labeling the emotion and you're labeling the part of you, and that makes it a little bit easier for it to uh, not feel like that makes up your whole being, or you're stuck inside of that box. You're able to better recognize like that's just a part of you, or in the case of the emotion, that's just something I'm feeling right now, and that's temporary and it's going to go away. So yeah, it can actually shift your brain out of panic mode and into the positive intelligence would call it the sage mode, but like it can actually help shift your brain into being able to be more creative and think more clearly and work through the problem rather than being overwhelmed by it. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up here is this idea of reactor versus observer. And we kind of touched on this with the last point a little bit, but mentally fit people catch their physiological spikes, and that might even be heart rate or breathing, and they insert that pause. So as I've grown in my own mental fitness, I do find that when I'm practicing it more and I'm fully equipped with it, I am an observer of the emotion. Right? Something happens, somebody cuts me off, and I start to get frustrated. I catch it immediately and I notice it, and I'm able to pause before I let that emotion well up or overtake me. Or maybe my partner is frustrated or something, and if I uh, if I just let it happen, maybe I would want to argue back right away or whatever. Whereas if I notice that I'm feeling that defensiveness starting to rise up in me, I can pause and kind of let it pass and acknowledge, like, well, why am I feeling defensive? Like maybe there is truth behind this. And so by working on your mental fitness and being able to start catching those spikes, whether it is an emotional or a physiological spike, like you might catch yourself breathing shallower, or you might notice that, like, oh, I feel like my heart's beating in my ears or something. If you start to notice those things and then insert that pause, you can become an observer of the emotion rather than a hostage to it, and rather than having it take over your whole emotional state and your physiological state as well.
Mm.
So I guess let's talk about the fix. Um, and I think the first thing we need to do is, a lot of what we're talking about is psychological, and I think we need to tie it back to the physiological. Um, so there are some risks around this. I do want to call out just briefly, which is we don't want to fake mental fitness, right? If we force a smile or we pretend like everything's great, firstly, we're not really doing mental fitness. We're technically still doing that mental toughness thing where we're trying to tough through it, or put on a happy face and pretend like things are great. But also it can cause you to fall into like toxic positivity. And toxic positivity is this idea of like, well, everything's great, don't worry, no complaints here. Like, it is okay to complain. And just like we're talking about with these emotions, it's okay to feel a negative emotion. We're not trying to stop them, because Andy actually gave an example earlier about the hot stove, right? If there's a hot stove and I have no nervous system or no feeling in my hand, and I put my hand on the stove, I'm going to burn my hand horribly, and it's going to be, it might burn through the bone or whatever. It's going to be awful. So I want that feeling of pain. I want to know when I touch the stove, I want to get that instant response, and my brain know to pull my hand away, because it's teaching me that this is hot and it's going to burn you, and it's protecting me. It's saving me from it. So we're not trying to suppress all emotion or pretend like everything's great all of the time, because that can lead to emotional rigidity, and then that leads to massive spikes in chronic stress, and it makes your stress more severe over time. So we want to practice that, um, uh, that connection of, this feeling or emotion is good. It is a signal for me. It's just maybe not so good that I want to be completely surrounded in it, or completely fall into it and let it take over everything that I'm thinking about.
Mm.
So a couple things to think about is, with this mind body continuum. The first one is a term I found in the research called the body budget, which you could also think of as a biological battery. Your brain manages its energy like a bank account. So when you have sleep or quiet time, or you're in nature, or different things like that, those are deposits. They are adding to your ability to cope in the future. And stress and even deep focus are withdrawals from that bank account. So if you're overdrawn, then you are not able to execute emotional regulation, and you basically have no mental fitness. So, um, the idea here would just be, pay attention to your physiological needs and your body budget in addition to the mental fitness aspect. If you find like, man, I just am not I'm getting angry all the time, but I don't know, I don't feel it building up in me, or I'm not able to catch it early enough, and I don't recognize it. Maybe evaluate if you are getting enough sleep, enough quiet time, solo, just alone time to recharge your batteries, and if you're spending enough time in nature. And those are just three easy ones. There's probably other things that would help with your body budget as well. Because if you're finding that your brain can't do the things it needs to become mentally fit, it might be that your body doesn't have what it needs to give your brain the space to be able to do that. And this ties into this idea too of mental flexibility, or yoga for the brain. So just work on practicing decoupling your attention from a negative inner monologue and pivoting to the constructive alternative. And that's not to say you have to have a solution for everything, or anything like that, but maybe look for the gift. If there is any sort of gift or opportunity in the situation that comes up, like maybe something bad happens, and I'm not saying the bad thing is a gift, but sometimes it opens up opportunities, or it helps you see things in a different way, or change your perspective. And that part of it can be a gift. So if you're able to uh, kind of remove your focus from the negative and try to think about alternative ways to look at it. Like, what could be the positive that came out of it? And I think, we, your example of like getting with job related stuff, I think is a good one. Like, if you get laid off, it's really easy to just see the negative. I don't have a job. I have all of these negative potential outcomes and things like that. Um, but I got laid off and I wound up with a better job that paid better and had better benefits and, ultimately was a better fit for me. So would I have known that better outcome was going to come initially? No, probably not. But um, instead of focusing on the negative, thinking about what positive could come out of something can really help to give you that shift and that flexibility. So Andy, I guess what do you think for the leader who's built their entire career on gritting their teeth? What's one of the first steps they could take towards this kind of holistic fitness without feeling like they're getting soft?
Yeah. So a couple of things, Ed. One is a pet theory that I've had for a while, which is that every person has something that connects with them that makes them feel small, and I mean small in a good way. I mean small in the sense that, when an astronaut goes into orbit and they look at the earth, it changes the way that they think about the world, right? Because yeah, there are no borders, right? There you can see the lights, like all that sort of stuff. And the very easy, like obvious things are like, some people love the ocean, some people love the mountains, right? But I think it's important to find that thing that makes you feel small, that gives you a sense of awe. And it doesn't need to be grand. It can be, you know, looking at flowers, it can be gardening, it could be watching a sunrise, it can be, you know, hardcore mountaineering. It could be whatever it is, but it's got to be something that changes your nervous system a little bit and shifts your perspective, usually in an involuntary way, right? The other thing is, find things that you like to do that ideally have no economic outcome or economic purpose. And I would encourage a couple of things for those activities. One is, it should be something that you can continuously get better at, or at least like your current skill set is unlikely to get worse over the intervening 15 or 20 years. So like if you're choosing a physical activity, ideally it's one that you're not elite at yet, so your improvement curve can outpace your aging curve, broadly speaking. Otherwise it turns into a bit of a bummer. The other the other piece is that, like, make sure it's got some sort of creativity, or some sort of outlet to it, that it's not like that there's some sort of like mental aspect to it where you need to think in addition to learning through it. And lastly, and this is again just um, a a point for me when it comes to all hobbies. If it has a gear acquisition aspect to it, the barrier to entry should be relatively low, and the ceiling to what you can spend should be nearly infinite, right? So if you think about, say, wristwatches, you can buy a wristwatch for 20 bucks, or you can spend millions of dollars on a wristwatch, right? And having that wide variety of things gives you basically like green field of interests and various things that you can do. Um, and I think when you look at hobbies, if you look at spaces, if you look at things that you do, the key is to do this for your own sake. And it's not getting soft. I find that, like, you'll very often learn more about your work or yourself, or like what makes you tick, or you'll come up with new analogies, or you'll be more relatable to the people you work with, whether it's um, whatever that endeavor is. I think that you'll find that the fruits of that labor will go far, far beyond an economic outcome. I know it's almost a cliche to post on LinkedIn of like, I went skiing this weekend and learned these 9 things about B2B sales, right? Or something along those lines. Um, but there's some truth in that joke, right? Of the things that you can learn from it. And I think the stability that it can give you is really, really, really valuable. Um, so yeah, find something to love and love it deeply, and try your darndest to prioritize it. I think oftentimes as our lives get busier, we lose those things, and find a way to integrate it, right? If you like cooking and you have kids, cook with your kids, teach your kids how to cook, right? If I don't like winter, broadly speaking. And over the last like 5 years, I've gotten really, really into skiing so that I have one, something to look forward to during a season that I find pretty droll and depressing. Two, it forces me to socialize with my friends and my family members. And now three, it's a thing that I get to do with my kids. Giant wins on all fronts, right? And that sort of stuff helps you center yourself. And I think for the ambitious types who might be listening to a podcast about the corporate life, like this, having that setup, like having that grounding, is valuable beyond like what you can effectively express, right? It's super easy to wrap all of your self-worth or all of your edness or whatever into what you do for your work. And the more things you have outside of your work that you care about, the easier it is to like let turbulence during this part of your life just be turbulence during this part of your life. And yeah, you can kind of shut that door and go do the other things that you care about.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into Monday morning application for our listeners. So here's a couple of things that I wanted to share as tips that I thought our listeners might find helpful and be able to take away and apply starting tomorrow or Monday morning, depending when you listen to this. So the first one we talked about was the 10-second rep. You don't need a yoga mat. You don't need anything special before your next high stakes meeting or Zoom call, or when you're catching yourself maybe feeling a little bit anxious, or before some big event. Just take 10 seconds to notice three physical sensations. Maybe it's the sound of the hum of the air conditioner. Maybe it's the weight of your feet on the floor. Maybe you rub two fingers tips together and you feel the ridges of the fingerprints on each finger. This will help shift your brain out of the survive region by grounding in your senses. Number two, label the part. When you start to feel an emotion or heat rising, don't just say, I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I'm happy. Create some distance and say, a part of me is feeling really anxious right now. And try to use a highly granular emotional label. Name it to tame it. And if it helps to get like a feelings wheel or a copy of Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, I think that are some really good tools to help you understand the emotions and the words for emotions, so you can label them better and be more granular and more deliberate when you label them. And then number three is the calendar audit. Protect your body budget. So look at your calendar for tomorrow, maybe even for the rest of the week, and get a sense of what the breakdown looks like. If it's 100% output and effort and 0% input, rest, exercise, silence, you are bankrupting your body budget. So at the minimum, just schedule a 15-minute biological reset for the next day. Find some time, or later this week if you can't do it tomorrow, to start building in some time to just give yourself 15 minutes to sit and do nothing, or go for a walk, or just do something to replenish, or start to replenish at least, your body budget. Anything else you'd want to add as takeaways or actions that our listeners could try, Andy?
Yeah, I think the one other piece, right, is reframing here as well. So if you're stressed out about that Zoom call, are you excited about that Zoom call? Right? That's one of the things that I think we like the anxiety excitement coin is one that's like pretty easy to flip. And you can you can really use that to your advantage. Be like, okay, like how do I get pumped about this? How do I get energized by this? Right? How do I turn this into, heavy metal playing in the locker room right before the whistle blows to start the game, as opposed to like shaking nervous. I think that that can be like really useful. Is like, how can you, like, every negative emotion that you have usually has a positive counterpart, and they feel the same. So can you make it the other one?
Yeah, that's great. Reframing is an excellent tool. We might have to talk about that in more depth in the future. But I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Mental toughness is just a shield, but mental fitness is a dynamic system. It's not about ignoring your pain, fighting a war against your own mind, or powering through until you burn out. It's about building the emotional vocabulary, the mental flexibility, and the biological recovery speed to bounce back from the inevitable disruptions of leadership. So here's your challenge this week. Audit your recovery velocity. The next time something derails you, don't focus on the fact that you fell down. Focus entirely on timing how quickly you can get back to baseline. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. When you hear that negative voice in your head, do you treat it like an enemy to be defeated or an overactive protector to be managed? And what is the one habit that best refills your own body budget? You can email us at leadershipexplored@gmail.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your stories or ideas for topics you'd like us to explore in the future. If you found this conversation helpful, please make sure to follow the show, leave a review, or share it with a colleague who cares about growing great teams. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.